Welcome everyone. I think we'll get started properly. I'm really touched and moved to see friends, old friends and new friends. I really welcome everyone. I'm on holiday in London, so everything is a bit different and frankly very rainy, like the stereotype says. So it's a funny way to begin in some ways. But next week I'll be home again in a normal setup. So I'm gonna say a formal welcome, and then I'm gonna share my screen and start talking about what's going on in the sheet and what we'll be doing in this course. So the idea of preparing for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, for the New Year, for who we want to be in the New Year, really, without the preparation, I found that these festivals can just pass us by. I found that we can get to them and suddenly wake up in a panic one day and find, oh my goodness, it's happening, and I'm not in the slightest ready. Of course, we're never really ready, like the title of the wonderful book by Rabbi Alan Lu, this is real and you're completely unprepared. And we're never really ready. Mira's holding the book, beautiful. But what can we do to be as ready as possible? And this text that we're going to be sharing together and the meditations from it, or Teshuva, the lights of Teshuva, one reason why I think it's such a helpful guide for us. I'm gonna mute everyone only because of the recording, but please unmute yourselves when you want to share something. One reason why I think it's such a great guide for us is it's not a book that tells you what to do. It's not even actually really a book of philosophy, although there's some elements of that. It's really very poetic. And it is so everyone will relate to it in their own way. It will speak to everyone's soul in their own way. And I think will be very moving for a lot of us. I hope so. It's very moving for me to inspire us to feel what we need to take our own journey of Teshuvah, of return, one step further. So that's the intention for the whole course that I hope we're going to begin to get a feel of today together. So let me share my screen so everyone can see the sheet easily. And really do feel free to put your hand up or unmute whenever you want to chime in with anything. Otherwise, we're going to proceed. So Rav Kook, as it says here, we're not going to read the whole bio. It's here for the handout is here for you to enjoy, to keep as a resource. But I will just mention some very important highlights. Born 1865, passed away in 1935. Actually, his yahrzeit, the anniversary of his death, will be during Elul and during this course. So we'll mark that together, which is very special. We'll celebrate his contribution. And this work of Rosh Hashanah, the lights of return that we're going to be sharing together and meditating from, is in a lot of ways, a lot of people see it as his quintessential or trademark work. A lot of people see it as like his utmost contribution, even though it's not especially long. And he didn't actually even strictly write all of it. He only actually really wrote the first few chapters, and then his son took most of it from his writings and arranged it and compiled it and edited it. So it's a very interesting thing. As I say, because the style is so poetic, it doesn't necessarily matter exactly which order everything is in, if you see what I mean. It's really about the feeling behind it. As it says here, you can read it if you want later yourself at greater length. Rav Kook was a great synthesizer. He synthesized actually coming from a Hasidic family on one side, on his mother's side, and from a Litvak, a Lithuanian family on the other, which meant he had two very, very different, even opposing worldviews going on inside him. And he saw no contradiction at all between them. He synthesized them in his own beautiful way. And that's really how he approached a lot of other seeming opposites and paradoxes, whether it's religious and secular, or the different approaches to aesthetics and art, different approaches to politics, left wing and right wing. He really saw everything as coming together towards a redemptive synthesis. And ultimately, we see that in his view on Teshuva. We'll see together over the course of this course that he sees Teshuva as a natural return of all things to their source, and that ultimately everything has this natural momentum. And that's what we want to do, essentially, is get out of the way and just let that happen and get back to our source. And that's really what he's talking about so much, as we'll find out together and as we'll practice together in the practices. I wanted to share the foreword he wrote. This is the famous first line of the foreword he wrote to the book when it was first published in 1925. He said, I'll be reading most of the text in English, but the Hebrew is always here for you to refer to. He says, with the help of the blessed God, Bezrat Hashem Yibrach, for some time I have been struggling with an inner conflict, and a mighty spirit compels me to speak about Teshuva. All my thoughts are focused only upon this. Teshuva holds a mighty place, a primary place in Torah and in life. All of our individual and collective hopes are built upon it. And this really frames the text and its importance, and says something about why this work is in general seen as so important. And by way of introduction, I want to say one other thing, which is this work doesn't exist in a vacuum. Of course, nothing does. It's his contribution to a conversation about Teshuva that's gone on. Let me come back to you. That's gone on for actually thousands of years. And in particular, I want to mention two ideas about Teshuva that he's very much in conversation with. There are many others. I'm being slightly negligent because there are so many, but this is not a course about text, as you know, and we're not here to primarily study the text. So I'm just giving you, the very, very most crucial highlights. The two ideas I think he's most in conversation with here. One is from the ancient rabbis, from the Midrash, and it's mentioned in the Talmud too, that Teshuva, returning to our source, was actually created before the universe was created. That before there could be us, a world, anything, there had to be Teshuva. And what does that mean? It means it's not something I do. It's not something that happens after the fact. It's actually something that is a prerequisite for existence. It's something that I can therefore tap into and indeed return to at any time. It's a state of being, a way of being, an invitation to connection. And that's very, very central to the whole way he presents everything he writes about Teshuva. The other thing I think is very, very important to bear in mind is he's in a way so faithful to, and in another way so different to, is Maimonides. Maimonides is a giant of philosophy and law in the 12th century in Spain, and then later Morocco and Egypt. He framed Teshuva as being a 4-step process of stop what you're doing, that is the problematic thing. See, he framed it as like Teshuva from something problematic. That's already a little bit different to Rav Kook. Stop what you're doing that's problematic, regret it, do the emotional work there, confess about what you're doing wrong, like use words to express what's going on wrong, and resolve to do better in the future. So that's based on the Talmud, right? Maimonides certainly innovated somewhat, but it's really based on the ancient rabbis. And that whole approach really defined Teshuva for a very long time. I would say it was the dominant rabbinic view of Teshuva until Rav Kook came along and offered this beautiful, poetic, personal take, which doesn't necessarily contradict Maimonides, but at the same time has a really beautifully different emphasis, I would say, about the individual's inner journey and our return to our source. So just really want to bear in mind how these ideas all play together, and how at the same time as being very traditional, he's very radical and innovative. I'll pause there. Does anyone want to jump in with any comments or questions on any of that introductory material before we proceed? If you raise your hand either in real life, I may see it in real life in your box if you're on this screen, or if you use the hand raising function. Ellen, you raise your hand. Perfect example. What would you want to say?
Lovely to see you. I would just say that I would put into that Maimonides to Cook. I would highlight also Nachman and that whole that movement as well. Nachman, like I think the Hasidic Rebbes of the 1800s really built the bridge from Maimonides to Cook, that then Cook shares so beautifully, I would say.
Oh man, absolutely. Actually, I think we'll be touching on that throughout the course. Rav Kook actually said more than once, both in words and in spoken words and in writing, I am Rabbi Nachman reincarnated. I am that soul reincarnated. So yeah, there's a tremendous connection. As I said, on one side, he came from a very strongly Hasidic family and really carried that into him. And you're absolutely right in terms of how these ideas evolved and how they came into the world. So thank you, Ellen. Thank you very much. I see a few more hands. Judah, please.
Yeah, when you were reading, it just struck me that Maimonides sounded like making amends and recovery in 12-step programs, and which is mainly directed to the other. Whereas what Rabbi Cook was saying sounded more inner directed. And that's not necessarily cut and dry, but I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you very much for that, Judah. Yeah, there's a very strong, interesting, a lot of parallels between Maimonides' approach to Teshuva and the 12-step program. And actually, Rav Kook's different emphasis is also really interesting to shine light on that. Thank you for mentioning that. Jordan, please.
Thank you for the introduction, and it's good to finally connect with you, Daniel. So I had a question in light of Tisha B'Av. So is Teshuva meant to take the place of Korban since the temple system isn't in place anymore?
So Maimonides begins his laws of Teshuva essentially by saying, these days, since we don't have sacrifices in the temple, essentially all we have is things like prayer and our work of Teshuva. So that's certainly one very valid approach to it. I think Rav Kook sees it as something more existential, as a meaning. I think Rav Kook's approach is whether or not there's a temple over there, this is work we all have to do. So again, it's not necessarily contradictory, but a different emphasis, I think. Thank you, Jordan, for that question. Susan, please.
I just want, it's more a comment, but I just wanted to say that I could marinate entirely for all the weeks of this course on the very first thing that you said about Teshuva being created before the world was created. That is so, that just leaves me with so much to think about and to be with. So I just wanted to note that I think my head and heart and soul are going to explode exponentially as we go forward. I just wanted to make that comment. That just seems to me so enormous. That's all I wanted to say.
Susan, thank you so much. I think you're in the right place, because really, as far as I understand it, I think that's all the Rav Kook is saying over and over again. I think that's all that we're doing over and over again, is finding a way to get back to something that already is, that I think that's inherent in the word Teshuva and in the work we're doing. I think that really is the foundational idea that we're tapping into. So thank you for articulating that so beautifully. Michelle and Richard, shalom, hi. Oh wait, you're muted. Let me see if I can help you. You got it.
Michelle. Thank you, Daniel. I'm tickled to be here with this wonderful group. A couple of good friends here as well. I am a practitioner of Musar, and I really have, over the years, I've been doing my practice for 14 years, and I want to tell you something. Maimonides' little guide to Teshuva has made the hugest difference and made such an imprint on my life every day of how I approach everybody. Apologize on the day before you die. It's brilliant, beyond brilliant, I think, to have a practice like that. And thank you for being here. I love Rav Kook too. So there we go.
Thank you so much. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. That Maimonides' approach to Teshuva is in itself a complete masterpiece. And actually, it makes it all the more remarkable that Rav Kook had something that's just a whole nother dimension. He takes it. He kind of feel he's interplanetary, like he's intergalactic. He takes things like the outer space in a way. So yeah, but thank you for reminding us that too. Friends, let's. Oh wait, there's one more hand. Wonderful, Tali-Ann, you raise your hand, please. Oh wait, you're muted now. Let me see if I can help with that.
So for me, it resonates with return again, return to the land of your soul. It's just what you're saying, and in that way that Rev Shlomo Karlebach of blessed memory took that to create Return Again, because I think that's the essence.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I think that was his inspiration. Thank you, Dalian. It's beautiful. Wow. Thank you, everyone. I can tell this is a wonderful, rich group. Let's keep sharing the screen, and let's get to the main course, as it were. This generally throughout the course, how we're going to do, that was the intro, is we're going to look at a text together. I'm going to hear from you. What do you think about it? And then we're going to do a meditative practice based on it. So that's what we're going to do now. This is the first text proper. We're going to look at most of the texts from Oral Teshuva itself, although you'll see some other texts from Rav Kook as well. And this is the one I chose to be our first one. And again, I'll read in English and the Hebrew's here for reference. So he says, when we forget the essence of our unique souls, when we distract ourselves from looking at the content of our own inner lives, everything becomes confused and full of doubt. And the primary Teshuva, that was a hard one to translate. Rav Kook is very hard to translate. I will claim your sympathy. The primary Teshuva, I could have also translated it as the ultimate Teshuva in a way. The main Teshuva, the primary, the main, the ultimate Teshuva, which immediately illuminates the sources of darkness, is when a person returns to themselves, to the root of their own soul, and they will return immediately to the divine, to the soul of all souls. I'll read that one more time. When we forget the essence of our unique souls, when we distract ourselves from looking at the content of our own inner lives, everything becomes confused and full of doubt. And the primary Teshuva, the main ultimate Teshuva, which immediately illuminates the sources of darkness, is when a person returns to themselves, to the root of their own soul, and they will return immediately to the divine, to the soul of all souls. Let's come back together. I'd love to hear any questions or comments folks have on that. Just check the chat. Right. Hina asked about all of the teachings we're going to meditate from will be from Rav Kook, in response to that question. I see Rona, raise your hand, please, Rona. Oh, wait, sorry, I tried to unmute you.
Wait, okay.
There you go.
Thank you so much for this. As I read this section, I'm asking myself, is it about forgiveness or is it about something quite different? Because it doesn't relate to the other in that sense. As someone just mentioned before, it's internal. Is there a forgiveness dimension to it as well in relation, let's say, to forgiving oneself? Is there any other related to it?
So great question. We're going to get there later in the course, but I think your question brings up for me is, whereas for the previous rabbinic model and Maimonides, that part was central and maybe even primary. Here, I guess he's saying really start with yourself. And maybe that's a reflection of the evolution of the idea of the self, of the person, of psychology, in psychology and global culture. That's where he starts. And also maybe it's also more faithful to that idea that Teshuva existed before there was anything. It isn't something that just comes along after I did something wrong. So maybe that's his emphasis. And Julian asked in the chat, is it saying Teshuva is Teshuva of the self, return to oneself? That indeed, Julian, it seems to me to be, he's saying that's the primary or the main part, the most important part of Teshuva, from which everything else comes. Yeah, that's what I see here.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin, please.
Yeah, hi. So I've been a student of Jung actually for many years, and I was really struck when I read this particular quote, how consistent actually with the way that Jung suggested people work on themselves is to Reb Kook's saying. The idea that looking at ourselves in kind of an unbiased way so that we can penetrate our souls, but actually see that our souls are multifaceted and contain dark and light and all kinds of things that in normal circumstances we choose not to face in ourselves. And so that by doing that, we have the starting point for becoming whole. And actually, even, Jung wrote extensively on the book of Job. And in fact, that Job's experience was an act of teshuva, although obviously Jung didn't use that term, but that in a sense, by seeing God's enormity and not just, God as like the way we kind of define God normally, which is usually just full of light and happiness and smiles and good, right? It's like God is everything, right? And contains all these contradictions, to go back to what we were saying before. So I found that a lot of that was reflected in Reb Cook's quotation that you had there before.
Thank you. Yeah, I really resonate with what I brought up in you, and I think the practice we're going to do shortly, based on it, I think is very much resonant with that as well. Thank you for that, Kevin. Sally, I see your hand, please.
Oh, no, it should be down. I'm sorry.
Oh,
'cause I
no,
spoke.
no, that's
Okay.
okay. Not Tally, but Sally.
Oh, okay, I thought I heard my name.
Good
Okay,
time.
thank you.
Someone in the chat touched on this and let go of fear. What I'm thinking about is that when we return to our unique soul, as Rav Kook says, and we sweep away the confusion and the doubts, and that's really right. So if we sweep away everything that is dirty or schmutzing up our lens, then often that's what gets in our way of forgiveness too, right? It's that preoccupation with our stuff, and so we come back and we sweep it away a little bit and we treat it with, as someone said, compassion and understanding, and then we can see much more clearly, maybe.
Beautifully put. Yeah, that's the work. That's exactly it. In fact, that's really where we're starting in the practice is exactly that. So I think it's a perfect opportunity to do that. So let's do it. The practices are on the sheet just so that you can do them in your own time whenever you want, but I'm going to guide us through the practice now. So please make yourself comfortable for our first practice. Find a posture that's good for you. We'll practice for around 10 minutes together. So if sitting works for you, if not, if you want to lie down, that's absolutely fine. Try not to fall asleep. Obviously, that's the challenge with that. And feel free to turn your camera off or to keep it on, whatever is good for you for the next 10 minutes. Begin to bring your attention inside yourself. Begin to notice whatever's going on inside you. Bodily sensations or emotions or thoughts, whatever's going on. Our very first practice is to choose an anchor. That's an object that we're going to try and bring our attention to and to keep coming back to it. And we need to. This will be our home base for this meditation and for any other meditations we like later on. If you have one that you use already for meditation, then of course use what works for you. And if you're not sure what to use, I advise finding a place in the body that's safe and neutral. So perhaps the feet or perhaps the elbows, somewhere we can bring our attention that doesn't bring up anything too adverse, too challenging. Somewhere it's safe and supportive. Bring curiosity. We might want to ask ourselves, what is happening in that place, in that object we've chosen, moment by moment? How does it feel? What can we notice? We're going to settle our attention, settle our system. We're just focusing on that object for a couple of minutes now. If our attention wanders, that's absolutely normal. We just gently bring it back with compassion to the object, the anchor we've chosen. Notice whatever's going on inside you. There's no such thing as succeeding or failing at this. There's no good or bad meditation. We exercise, we practice. The practice itself is our teacher. By trying to focus on one thing, we just get more aware. We're shown more about what's happening. So whatever's going on inside us, whether it's easy or pleasant, or not so easy, not so pleasant, our job is to welcome it with compassion, keep practicing, keep returning to our anchor. This is what Rav Kook calls the content of our inner lives. Any sensations or emotions or thoughts which arise, he says we don't want to distract ourselves from them. We want to be aware of them. And the paradox is, the more we gently release each one, we notice it, we accept it, maybe even welcome it, then gently release it to return to the anchor. And the more we do that, each time we do that, we actually become more still and more aware, more able to see deeper what's going on inside us. So keep noticing whatever's arising and keep coming back to your anchor, asking yourself what's happening there moment by moment. And use the insight, the calm, clarity that gives us. Notice how we're doing, what's going on inside us. And for the last part of the practice, let's pay attention to if we find whatever's happening moment by moment pleasant or unpleasant. If our basic disposition towards it is, I like this, I want more of this, or I don't like this, I want less of this. Just noticing that as a whole nother layer of our awareness, our ability to be present with that inner life. What's going on? And for the final minute of our practice, as we talked about together, can we bring compassion to whatever's happening? Wherever we are, whatever we're experiencing, can we let ourselves be a vessel for compassion? And let's gradually bring the practice to a close. Slowly. If you'd like to wiggle your fingers and toes, if that's helpful, slowly open your eyes. Move or stretch any way you like. And let's come back together in your own time. Thank you everyone for your practice. If anyone would like to share anything that arose or an insight or a question, you're very welcome to. Mira, please.
What really struck me was when you talked about what's happening inside. And I meditated for a while, but I think like a brain and stuff is being outside. And I wonder if you could say a little more about inside. I'm someone that doesn't feel a lot of sensation, but lots of thinking, and which I'm able to let go, and be more the knower. But the inside is, I'd like to hear more.
I was basing that on that passage, the teaching from Rav Kook, where he said, we distract ourselves from our soul, and he seemed to equate that with the inner content of our lives, what's going on inside ourselves. So I think that includes thought as well. I happen to be someone who primarily I'm led by my emotions and feel a lot in my body also. So I have a different challenge of how I reconcile all those different aspects. I think ultimately, if we do a practice like this, if we do it diligently, I think it doesn't actually matter so much what we choose to focus on initially. I think it will lead us to the same place. If we're faithful to the practice of holding with compassion whatever comes, I think ultimately it will take us there. So the whether it's thought or feeling or sensation, and whether we experience it initially, as being inside, whatever that means. I think the practice will naturally take us to and through all of the kind of categories or barriers that we might think are there. I think eventually they dissolve as we practice more. But everyone in their own way, it's a very unique individual path. Yeah, thank you for the question. Michelle or Richard, please.
I was so inside, Daniel, and what kept coming up for you is about forgiving myself.
Mm.
And the opportunity of the high holy days of Yom Kippur, when at the very beginning, when God forgives us, that was always my thing. I never heard that. I didn't know that. It took me years, up until just reading Lou's book, I think, that I start to realize that God already forgave me. I don't need to do that work. And that once that happened, that the opportunity to forgive myself for my missteps, whatever they are, however I rate them, big, small, or whatever, allowed me to have more kavod for the other.
Mm.
And that's the source of a spiritual life for me. Kavod for the others, to work on that. How expansive can I get in this lifetime in that area? Thank you for this, and thank you to my friend Judah for suggesting this. Oh my gosh, thank you.
So welcome, and thank you, Judah, and thank you for articulating that so beautifully. How, of course, all of our work on ourselves, our relationship with other people, our relationship with God, how, of course, it's all so connected. And you articulated so beautifully one way it can flow. It came to me during that meditation. What you said just reminded me, of course, one of the key parts of the liturgy in the high holidays, especially on Yom Kippur, which is like the highlight, is the 13 attributes of compassion. And that's what we're really building up to. In the special prayers we say leading up to the high holidays, of slichot, in the traditional liturgy, we repeat those 13 attributes of compassion over and over again. And then when we get to Yom Kippur, we repeat them even more intensely. And I really think, what you just said about, ultimately, this is all about letting ourselves be forgiven. And so then, of course, that will affect how we treat others also. So, that's the work. That's exactly it. And everyone has to get there in their own way. So I hope we're beginning the journey. Let's hear from a couple more people. Annie, please.
Well, thank you. I've meditated on and off for many, many, many years, and it became less comfortable for me because somehow, I don't know, it got too mental. And this returned me to how it was the Teshuva practice all the way around. It was so much fun and so interesting. What came up for me immediately was bitachon and wanting, opening for it. And then ashrei, yoshvei was going through my head constantly. And then, being human, I thought of the burgers that I grilled last night. It was very funny. And a friend that spoke with me this morning, and I wasn't completely compassionate. But because of your instruction and the whole being deeply in my soul, it was so delicious. I found it funny. I just found it comforting to be able to recognize it in this compassionate way. And every day when I say the blessings, being made in your image, all those attributes, this is such a way to know that we started out with them all in us, and touch into them a little bit. It was really delicious. Thank you.
You're so welcome, Annie. And thanks for reminding us about the importance of a sense of humor. I think it's such an easy trap to fall in, to take ourselves seriously. And then, God forbid we forget that we're human and that we're meant to mess up. She does some really, really funny midrash, some ancient rabbinic texts, which talk about that, which talk about how, of course, we mess up all the time because that's how God made us, and actually it's God's fault. And actually, there's a rabbinic text which imagines Adam, the first person, speaking to God and saying, "What do you mean? I'm not supposed to have eaten from the tree. You put the tree there. You made this whole situation. Who do you think you are? You know, and all these different ways it plays out. And I think it's not just about the text of the Torah and the story there. It's about the human condition, you know, and so important to remember. So thank you, Annie, for that reminder. It's a very important piece of our work. Helene, please.
Thank you for doing this, and hello to all my Musar friends. This is fun to see you all. I struggled, and I was trying to figure out why I was struggling, and I kept going back to the first quote that you shared about looking for our shorish neshama, the root of our soul. And when you said anchor, what I got during the meditation is that I needed to ground my anchor. My anchor didn't have a shorish. My anchor didn't have the root that it needed. And when I looked at it, it was like the roots were all tangled and they were in a knot. So I sat there like untangling, unraveling, taking the knot out, like you're taking the knot out of something. And every time something else unraveled or unfolded or untangled, it was much more comforting as opposed to the discomfort. But the beginning of it was like really sitting in this knot that I've created. But it was like, oh, that's what you're feeling. So thanks for bringing that awareness to us. Thank you.
I love that, Helene. That's such a great, I might use that as such a great way of putting the kind of like opportunity we have now, right? Like we spend all year working ourselves, tying ourselves in knots, and now we get to like begin to unravel it a bit. And of course it is a relief. It's a tremendous relief when we begin to do that. Thank you. I think we have time for just one more comment because I want to then move on to the next text in practice. So Ellen, please.
Well, very quickly, I just want to thank Ellen because I have spent times with exactly that image of sitting in the knot. So thank you. And sometimes what I love is when it unravels, it just starts to unravel itself, because the more we jerk at it, sometimes the tighter it gets. So I love sometimes just, oh, my knot's unraveling on its own. How beautiful. But I wanted to read one line, Daniel, if I can. And you may have read this at the beginning and I didn't hear it. So, but you said, you said how Rav Kook says, I'm impelled from my inner essence to speak about Teshuva, recoil from my intention. But I just read the next line and it says, am I worthy of speaking about Teshuva, the greatest of the previous generations, the prophets, the sages, the greatest men of piety wrote about Teshuva. How can I place myself in their company? And I think for me, that's a place where I am in terms of true humility versus false humility and our voices being heard. And if he said, how can I, when we think about how remarkable his voice was, and he said, how can I place myself? And what if he hadn't done that because he didn't feel good enough to be? What if he had made the other choice? So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. That's a really powerful reminder. True greatness is true humility. And yeah, we're so much better off that he did that, but we're lucky he made that call, right? And it's a really it's a constant avodah, a constant work for all of us. Of course, the balance between healthy ego and esteem and healthy humility. The Baal Shem Tov talks about that a lot, and how he says that there's such a thing as what you think is humility, but it's actually pride, and vice versa. So it's constant, it's endless, to be constantly really doing this work of coming back to ourselves and checking with what's really going on and becoming more authentic. That's what this class is about, right? To see what's really going on inside. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to everyone. Also, I see there's some wonderful things on the chat. Sorry, I don't have time to read and respond to all of them as I'm also in this conversation with everyone. But let's share screen again and do another text, another practice. Generally, in most classes in the course, I'm going to try and get through 3, I hope, in each, because this one included an introduction. Maybe we'll only do 2. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll just begin the 3rd. So the second text is really, really special. I was so struck by it when I found it. So I'm very, very happy to be sharing it with you. And just, there you go. So it's from his notebooks, Shmona Kvatzim, his Rav Kook's notebooks, some of which were previously published and some of which were not published until relatively recently in 1999. And this part, I believe, wasn't published previously, as far as I know. Who he says here, only the sacred content of both the individual and the universal has an independent personality and existence, which stems from its own internal self-originality. I'll repeat that. He writes like this. In Hebrew, it's even harder. It's very dense. He says, only the sacred content of both the individual and the universal has an independent personality and existence, which stems from its own internal self-originality. And he's going to juxtapose that now with something else. But the secular content, and all the more so the evil and impure, has no independent personality nor independent desire, and no essentially independent will. And this is where it begins to become clear. If you're not sure what he's talking about, this is where it becomes clear. He says, rather that the secular and the evil and the impure, they are merely compelled by external actors, which cause its physical and spiritual actions. The source of individual and independent desire, and lust is in sanctity, kedusha, and all who attach themselves to this are nourished by it. And then he quotes from the Torah, from Devarim, from Deuteronomy, and you who hold fast to Hashem, your God, are all alive today. Ba'atem hadbeikim ba'Hashem Elokechem chaim kulchem hayom. It's a verse we say out loud in the synagogue during the Torah service. So maybe I'll say again what he said in my own words, as far as I understand it. I mean, this is my attempt to translate it here. It's a very hard passage to translate. But hopefully it will help shed light on it, because I know it's not the easiest language, but the idea, I think, is so powerful. So he says, the sacred content of both us as individuals and also of any collective that we're part of, whether it's a community, a people, or he says the universal, so the entire species or the entirety of life, the Kodesh, that which is, it's actually impossible to translate Kodesh really. Like, I say sacred as if it's a good translation. Kodesh can also mean transcendent. Maybe that's also a helpful translation, or separate. Of course, he's talking about that which is related to the divine mystery, which we can't define, right? We say Hashem as a name for the divine, the name, because we can't say the name of Hashem because we don't know it. We don't even know how to say it. So by definition, that which is sacred, that which is Kodesh, is impossible to define and say anything more about. Another way we can understand sacred or Kodesh is also in the sense of Kiddushin or Kiddush, the prayer that we say, which is something which is uniquely designated. Like Kiddushin is what we call the part of marriage in Judaism where two people are uniquely designated to each other. And Kiddush is a prayer we say when we say this time is uniquely special, where we take a cup of wine or grape juice, we say this is a uniquely special time, and so on. So something which is unique and special in that way. The Kodesh, it has, he says, an independent personality in existence, which stems from its own internal self-originality. That's, again, my attempt to translate what he's saying in beautiful Hebrew. But on the other hand, he says, something secular, and all the more so something that's actually evil, whatever that means, right? Something, I would say evil is, according to other similar texts, as Rav Kook and Hasidic texts talk about evil as that which separates between the source of life and life itself, and that which separates between organisms and so on. So that which is secular, or which separates between things, that, he says, has no independent personality or desire and no independent will. Rather, it is merely compelled by external actors, which cause its physical and spiritual actions. And when he says our individual and independent desire and lust is therefore, it flows from Kodesh, from that which is unique, from that which is truly unique and connected to the divine ultimately. So how I understand this is, that which is unique about us, most unique about us, is also that which is most divine about us. And that which is simply reacting to conditioning, which is a lot of us, right? Which is a lot of our thoughts and speech and words and actions. A lot of the time, we're just reacting to conditions. That is maybe secular, maybe, God forbid, even sometimes, on the side of evil or impure. We're all only human. But what he's challenging us to do here is to find what is the Kodesh part, what is really unique about us. And he's asking us to try and begin to orientate towards that, and maybe even to begin finding it, because that, he says, is where desire and lust, and by extension thought and speech and action come from, which are really ours. They're not just the result of external conditioning. And I have to say, this piece resonates with me so much. Let's come back together. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can be with you. This resonates with me so much in the context of the world we live in today, in terms of being constantly bombarded by images and advertising, and to a mind-boggling degree, so much more than we were a few years ago. Other people want us to do what they want us to do, right? It's not their fault. They're just people like us. But they're trying to make money from giving us messages all the time to do this and that. And what is really my own? Like, what thoughts and speech and action are really my own? So that's what we're going to practice with after we've discussed this source. Let's see what's on the chat. And also, I'd love to, if people want to raise your hands, it's great to hear what anyone wants to say about this or ask about this. See, Julian says consciousness awareness must then be rooted in our individuality, individual makeup. Exactly, right? Thank you, Julian, for putting that so beautifully. He's really celebrating that aspect of ourselves, and Hina says, or at least connected to it. Exactly, and I think, yeah, to me, he's really celebrating that. And I think someone we mentioned before. I think it was Ellen. Yeah, thank you. It was just blank for a second. Ellen reminded us of how important the Hasidic contribution was to this whole conversation. And the Hasidic rabbis were teaching at the same time as the Romantic poets, the great Romantic poets like Wordsworth is the one that most comes to mind. And he made such an important contribution to this conversation also of saying, what is unique about what's going on inside us is actually to be celebrated and deserves to have attention paid to it. It's very much what a lot of the Hasidic rabbis were saying, sometimes even in quite similar language, and it's very much seems to be the thread Rav Kook is following here. Let's hear from you. I really want to hear what people think. Susan, please.
This passage, to me, my opinion, speaks so much to the challenges I know in in the United States and elsewhere of things that have fomented division between us. That this seems like really very, very prophetic about because these things that are outside are inspiring separation, and which to me is and in our tradition is a false idea. So it feels very, very current and universal. And I mean, this is not a new problem. We seem to keep finding ourselves in this place. That's all.
Susan, I'm very touched by that. I really feel that as well. And I want to say it's such a beautiful paradox that the more we do this work of finding what's unique about ourselves, the more we realize how connected we really are to everyone else, right? And that's the work he's inviting us to do. And that's, on the other hand, when people let themselves be conditioned so much, then they forget who they really are, then they let themselves be separated. And that is happening to all of us, and without judgment, it happens to me as well. But that's what the work. And Annie asked on the chat, and other people asked about it too, that what does it mean that we're unique? And what comes out for me in response to that, which speaks to also what you just said, is we're all the result. Of course, we're all the result of things which have come before. Of course, we're all the result of DNA and conditioning and parents and grandparents and whoever else, teachers and relationships and millions of other conditions in life. And yet, we're all also, we all have an individual fingerprint and face and neshama. What is a neshama? I have no idea, but I know that it's unique and we all have one, whatever that means, right? So that's what he's asking us to turn our attention towards and to yearn for, to connect with. And that in itself, I think, is a very, very, very powerful part of this process. Let's hear from some more folks. Sally, please.
So I have a question, and I just wanted to look back at the text for 1 second. Yeah, when he talks about the source of individual and independent desire and lust is in the Kodesh, and yet, we just did a practice of sitting and noticing, right? And you were telling us and we were, directed to notice, our desires and our aversions. And the desires, I find, the desires and the aversions are to sensations, to thoughts, so those are not actually what I would call unique. I would call those resulting from something, right? So I am actually confused, quite.
Excellent, good. It's a holy and healthy and beautiful confusion, and I don't claim to have all the answers. But here's my best attempt to address what I think you're asking about and confused about. I was recently on a meditation retreat in a Buddhist setting where they talked a lot about dependent arising. Right, everything's a result of conditions arising. For those of you who are familiar with that framework, so I totally get that. I think Rav Kook is saying there's something beyond that. We might never actually fully grasp it, right? You might never be able to hold your neshama, your soul in your hand and say, got it, right? To fully, define it. Maybe it is indefinable and fully ungraspable, but maybe we can yearn for it. Maybe it's by directing ourselves, by, it's kavanah, right? To direct and intend towards something where maybe that's to direct towards the transcendent. And Buddhism and Judaism, Buddhism is vast and not one thing, but there are many, many complementary aspects of both. But maybe this is one place where he used very different language. I think it's still possible to reconcile them in some ways. I know some people that do, but I think, we direct ourselves in Jewish mysticism explicitly towards something transcendent. And Buddhism uses, a different set of tools maybe to do something different there. And we would say, even though I can't touch it and grasp it and define it, there's something unique that is beyond all this dependent arising, is beyond all this conditioning, and I'm gonna look for it. I'm gonna try look for it as an attempt to return to it and see what comes. And that's not to deny all the conditioning or the everything that is a product of conditioning, because we can only really get there through being honest and real about what's going on, right? We can't get to anything, we can't even have those glimpses or moments of transcendence without being really real about what's really going on. But through that, eventually, maybe we can. In the Zohar, in Kabbalah, they use the language of touching but not touching, mati velo mati, and that seems to me to be a very central piece of the puzzle here for how he's directing us towards on a Shema. He doesn't, I don't think he expects us to fully own it, but just can we have that kind of relationship with it? Thank you, Sally. One more, Rona, please.
Okay, this text for me raises some challenges, even some contradiction. In the first instance, it seems to indicate that, let's say, for a person who has a great deal of evil in them, okay, you can think of many examples. What is it saying that aspect of that person is not unique? And then furthermore, it also suggests a split in terms of the divine. If God is one, God has to also include evil. I mean, you can't have it both ways. So then where does the evil reside? Does it not ever reside in the divine? It's all external. So, it's just raising all those seeming contradictions to me.
Yes, these are so I'm going to try and answer really concisely for the sake of time, but these are very big questions which many people have written many pages about. But the how I would present the kind of like very somewhat simplified version of at least the Hasidic take on it, which I think Rav Kook would follow to a large extent, is ultimately he believes in a loving, infinite Ein Sof, something that's just unlimited love. That's God. That's that's the source of everything. And so everything that seems to be evil is essentially an opportunity, is a challenge, is essentially an opportunity for growth. Now, it might be very, very hard. That doesn't mean that everything is always nice. It includes death and suffering and terrible things, because that's what gives us real free will and real meaning in our life. But ultimately, if we work far enough up to the root and keep going to the root of the root of the root of the root, it's a good root. That's ultimately the belief. So, yeah. And I'm not claiming it's like easy to do that work or that answers every possible question, but I think that's the short version.
But I won't belabor it, but if that's the case, then this statement doesn't quite fit, because even the evil has a sacred content.
Absolutely. So it does, and that right. So no, I thank you for the question. I think he's saying that if we react to it, if we're compelled by it, that's really what he's saying. If we let it compel us, then we are kind of perpetuating the evil. We are bringing more evil to the world. Whereas if we do the work of holding it with compassion and looking at it and tracing it back to its root, then we can find the positive root of it. That's maybe the difference.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for the question. It's really helpful. What the Kabbalists and the Hasidic rabbis would talk about that work in terms of dat, awareness or knowledge. That's the difference. Do we let ourselves be compelled, or do we notice what's going on and choose to act with awareness? Let's practice together, because I'm mindful of the time. And really thank you everyone again for everything on the chat and everything you're contributing here. So let's make ourselves comfortable. And again, the practice is on the sheet for you to do in your own time, but I'll guide us through it here. So please, again, keep your camera on or turn it off, whatever's best for you for this practice. And again, let's bring our attention inside ourselves. And for this practice, we can reflect silently as we did with the first practice, but also this is what I'm going to provide once we're settled are questions which can be prompts for silent reflection, but also for writing, for drawing, for any other creative practice. So if you want to grab a pen, or indeed you use your computer, whatever you're using for the session, to write or draw, you're very welcome to also. So I'm going to offer these questions in a moment. And first of all, let's just settle, noticing what's going on inside ourselves. Let's practice welcoming whatever we notice in this moment within us with compassion. If you'd like to, you can come back to your anchor, your object from the first practice. That can be a helpful home base, helping us to settle. So the first question, again, this can be for silent reflection, for sitting with, or if you'd like to write or draw or express about it. First question is, what are some of the external actors which affect me? What are some of the more significant things which affect what I think, what I say, what I do? What are those things that come to mind in this moment? It doesn't have to be a comprehensive list, but what are some of them that come to mind? Might be thinking about people or forces or media, all different kinds of entities that may exert influence on us in different ways. Whether you've just got one in mind or several. The second question is, when I am even very slightly more free from some of their influence, when the influence fades just a little bit, what happens? And if it's helpful to help answer this question, you can imagine yourself in a supportive environment, maybe with somebody who you find very supportive, who brings out the best in you, maybe in a place that you love being, that you feel very much yourself. Notice what is it that happens when you feel a little bit more free of whatever external influences you've identified. And a very connected question to that, what might I notice within myself when I'm in this situation? What do I notice within myself when I'm a little bit more free from that conditioning? Because I'm in a certain place or with a certain person or whatever it is that's helping me be a little bit more free of that conditioning. What do I notice within myself? And you can, if you're reflecting or writing or drawing with that and you want to keep going, please keep going. I'm going to name the other questions for you to use as and when you want to. Whatever's going on inside you, inside us right now, when we imagine being a little bit more free, how does this relate to what Rav Kook calls the Kodesh, the sacred, the holy, transcendent? And what is my relationship with this way of being, this part of myself or this version of myself? Is this very familiar? Is this how I usually am? Is this how I am most of the time right now? And is it Kodesh? Is that how I would describe it? Maybe I have another word or bunch of words or image or a different association. What is it to me? How would I identify this way of being where I'm a little bit more free from external conditioning, a little bit more myself? What do I call that? How do I think or feel about that? And finally, is this a way of being I would choose to experience more in my life? Is this something I'm yearning for? And if so, how can I support myself with that? What can I do to help myself invite more of this into my life, manifest more of this in my life? Let's bring the practice to a close for now. Of course, we're just beginning some of these practices. We'll have to continue later in our own time if you'd like to. Let's come back together when you're ready. So I really want to respect everybody's time. And for today, our time is almost up. As I said, today we had an introduction and also, of course, a slightly bigger group than we may have going forward. So, we had wonderful sharing and conversations. I hope in the future classes, we'll be able to do 3 practices in each class based on 3 texts. And you will have the handout, which has another text on it. And I'll just say a word about that now so that everyone, who wants to can spend their own time on it. The final text is about prayer and how Rav Kook writes in his commentary on the prayer book on the Siddur, that it's in prayer that we can articulate and embody the return, the Teshuva, not only of ourselves to our source, but of all life, that we can be channels and conduits for that return. And so the text is a very, very beautiful articulation of that, which I urge you to read in your own time and enjoy. And then there's a practice based on that for us to begin to find the prayer that's naturally arising and residing within us in each moment. And it will be different in each moment, of course. So that's what's left on the rest of the sheet. And then there's just a final closing thought for integration. And I really just want to thank everyone very, very much. I'm sorry we didn't actually have time for more sharing after the second practice also, but for those of you who do the whole course, whether you've already joined or you plan to, there'll be a WhatsApp group, as I mentioned earlier, so we'll be able to share whatever is arising for us with the rest of the group and to learn from each other there also. So thank you everyone very, very much. And thanks again to everyone who shared and everyone who was just present. It was very, very lovely to be with you all. And I'll send out the recording tomorrow, if not later tonight, depending on what else happens, but by tomorrow. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your day and blessings. I look forward to continuing the journey together.
Thank you so much.
Yes, welcome, Jill. Bye, everyone.
Rabbi Daniel, can you stay on with me for just 1 second? I have a question for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll stay on.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So
That
welcome.
last meeting is amazing. Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.